also going to share my screen. Welcome everyone. We're going to be starting in just a moment, just giving people a little bit of time to join. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. So my name's Emma. I'm the Learning and Engagement Officer at St Albans Museum and Gallery. I'm just going to, my screen's doing something a bit weird. Apologies for that. Not a good start. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's really lovely to have you here. So tonight we're going to be talking about masked emotion, what the pandemic has taught us about wellbeing and the arts. And we're going to be hearing from three really fascinating speakers. We're going to be hearing from Jordana Peake, who's a mixed method researcher with a passion for the arts. She's been carrying out an evaluation exploring how taking part in arts activities conducted as part of Hertfordshire's Year of Culture has impacted on individuals' wellbeing over the past year. We're also going to be hearing from Helen Barnett, who's the creative director of Trestle Theatre Company based at Trestle Arts Base in St Albans. Trestle are a mask and physical theatre company focusing on education and providing community arts opportunities. Helen will discuss the impact COVID-19 has had on the company's work and how the arts can play a part in sponsoring our collective mental health, supporting our collective mental health. And Nic Madge, finally, is a St Albans-based photographer and writer. His ongoing project, Pandemic Portraits, recording the way in which the people of St Albans are living through the COVID pandemic, will be shown as a multimedia presentation now that the St Albans Museum and Gallery is open. He has written on many topics, including social history. So wonderful to hear from all of them. We're going to be getting started hearing from Jordana in a moment. Just to let you know, if you have any questions for any of the panelists or for myself, please do pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. And if you have any technical issues, please do put them into the chat. We are recording the session today, so your questions will be part of the recording. All right, I'm going to now pass over to Jordana. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello there, I'll just share my screen with you all. So I hope you're all able to see my screen. So today I'm going to be talking to you about how taking part in arts and cultural activities that have been carried out as part of Hertfordshire's Year of Culture have impacted on individuals' wellbeing over the past year. While carrying out this evaluation, I was working as Senior Evaluation Officer at Hertfordshire County Council. So I'll start by giving you a bit of background to why we decided to do the wellbeing evaluation. I'll then detail some key methods and then move on to findings. So firstly, looking at the arts activities that were carried out with adults, and then moving on to those carried out with children and young people. And I'll give a particular example of an activity, which would be the Trestle Theatre Company's mask project. So there have been shown to be many beneficial effects of taking part in art activities on health. And when looking at mental health specifically, there are indications of benefits. However, many studies fail to look at art processes. Loneliness is, thinking about well-being, one of the key challenges to well-being is loneliness. And in this particular area, the evidence is even more limited. However, there are indications that arts-based social prescribing, so that's, for example, when someone goes to their GP and says that they're lonely, that consideration of, in addition to or instead of more conventional therapies, to them, being considered that they get referred to activities in the community such as arts activities. And there is some evidence that taking the arts-based social prescribing increases aspects of social cohesion such as social connectedness, isolation and loneliness. And then, thinking about the year in which this evaluation has been carried out, so Hertfordshire Year of Culture 2020, no one could have predicted the pandemic that we've all experienced. We've been in 3 national lockdowns. It's been a very challenging time for everybody, and during this period, social isolation has effectively become the norm. And therefore, it was decided that the focus of the evaluation would be to look at the impact of these activities being carried out as part of Hertfordshire's Year of Culture on the well-being of individuals who are lonely or socially isolated, in order to feed into this idea of the importance of social prescribing. The focus was on online and face-to-face because many arts activities had to transition to online over the past year, and for certain periods particularly. And critically looking at how, so not just whether taking part in these activities improves well-being, decreases loneliness, but sort of the mechanisms of action. And so both quantitative and qualitative data were collected. For the quantitative data, national measures of ONS national measures of well-being and loneliness collected before and after an activity took place where appropriate. But then to really understand this how, the need for the more qualitative data, semi-structured interviews, focus group discussions, more arts-based approaches. And just to state that ethical approval was obtained for the evaluation as we were working with very vulnerable groups, and consent, whether it was verbal or written, was obtained prior to any interviews or focus groups. And so moving on to some results. So this table shows the 8 activities that took part in the evaluation. So the top 4 with adults, the bottom 4 with children and young people. The ones in blue were online, the ones in red were offered face-to-face. It's great they were still able to be offered face-to-face. And then the purple is the blended. So mainly they were offered face-to-face, but for certain periods they had to move online. And I'm going to focus on the qualitative data, because what became quite clear was that it's impossible really to disentangle whether any changes in well-being or loneliness scores before and after activities were due to the actual activity themselves or the challenges of the pandemic. But what became very clear from the qualitative data was that taking part in these activities has been like a lifeline for people over this difficult year. And people spoke about how arts activities, they're who we are, with artwork having a deeper meaning, breaking down barriers and providing connection not only with others, but sort of with the world around us. And crucial to this is that they enable us to be in a world of our own, get completely lost, forget about everything else, that emotional component to actually, have fun, the freedom of expression, so an expression not being constrained by what is right or wrong. However, in order to be able to feel that you can express yourself freely, these activities need to take place in a safe space. And crucial to this is the teacher, and the teachers couldn't be praised highly enough, and the way in which they responded to the needs of different individuals. And also, you're not doing it on your own, you're taking part in these activities with others. And that connection that provides, particularly at such a challenging time, people spoke about how by taking part and touching base with others, they didn't feel alone in how they were feeling, and it increased confidence, self-esteem, and something special about creating with others, doing something quite meaningful. which gave people purpose and that sense of challenge, what you've achieved after, you know, developing your skills, that feeling of accomplishment. And yeah, it's that sense of enjoyment going beyond the class. So going away and continuing with the dancing and painting, really having that passion for what you're doing. And then looking at the activities carried out of children and young people, as you can see, many of the responses mirror those for the adults. And again, it was the qualitative data that was really interesting. And what was really quite fascinating was this sense of arts activities enabling us to be enabling you to be who you want to be, taking that idea further of arts activities being who we really are, and the sense of being challenged, you know, developing skills and being sociable, having the, you know, the opportunity to meet up with friends or touch base with friends at such a challenging time. And what I wanted to focus on to finish is the mask project. So that was a 4-day workshop that was able to go ahead face to face during October half term last year. And when young people, it's done with young people, and when they were asked what they liked most about drama, these were the things that they stated in the box at the bottom of the slide. What was really interesting was that the mask project itself seemed to reflect back all of these things. So it seemed to give people this space so that they could express how they're feeling in a non-threatening way. So each day, the young people, the artists and counsellors, they touch base with them to see how they're feeling, but they didn't ask them in a heavy, you know, way, how are you feeling directly. People are fed up of saying how they're feeling. They asked them, you know, if you were an animal, what animal would you be? Or if you were a packet of crisps. Made it light, but still provided that platform to be able to, you know, express how they're feeling. And there were lots of games interspersed throughout the week. So it enabled the young people to start to form connections with each other, even though they hadn't met each other before, really quite quickly. There was no, you know, unlike school where, you know, there was no hierarchy. So everyone's ideas were, you know, important. They could be as off the wall as they wanted. It was very much led by the young people. It was, yeah, there was that sense that whatever you say, you won't be judged. You can just be yourself. And this important thing, I mean, over the past year, we've all been wearing masks that have covered up to here. And the Trestle Theatre Company is a mask and physical theatre company, masks that cover the whole face, a sad face, an angry face. And what this enables the young people to do, to really sort of sink into that emotion. So people were saying that there were individuals who didn't feel comfortable performing. The counsellor and the artist were talking about how, yeah, there were individuals who didn't initially feel comfortable performing, and then they put on this mask of sadness and they really felt able to it sort of took over their whole body, and they were able to express that emotion when they, you know, they didn't feel able to before. So it's very, very powerful. And, you know, effectively, you know, this sense of having a crash course, 4 days, amazing, having an in-depth study of masks and filmmaking, that sort of challenge and those new skills as well. So I'm sorry, I've probably gone over my 10 minutes, just to say thank you to all these people. Wouldn't have been possible without them. Particular thanks to all those who took part in the evaluation and spoke to me. And I'm now going to hand over to Helen for the next presentation. Thank you for listening.
Hello everybody, I am just sharing my screen, so I hope you can all see that. My name's Helen Barnett. I'm the creative director of Trestle Arts Company, and hello, sorry, I hadn't realised I hadn't started my video there. My name's Helen Barnett. I'm the creative director of Trestle Arts Company, and thank you so much, Jordana, for that wonderful explanation of your evaluation of our mask project. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the company first of all, and then I'll go into a bit more detail about that arts and prescription work we do and the other work that we've done in the pandemic, and how we've seen the masks and that connection to emotion kind of benefit, and the interesting things we found. And I'll share some quotes and some memories and thoughts from some of our participants as well. So we are a mask and physical theatre company. We're based at Trestle Arts Base in St Albans, but we work all around the world. We are 40 this year, and we have an exhibition up at the museum currently, which is why we've kind of all come together here, with Nic's exhibition being up at the museum as well, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. So we wanted to share some of this work as a celebration, and we felt, you know, Emma came to us and said, what can we do as part of your exhibition that's an online talk? And we felt that it was really important at this time to talk about the effect that what we do has had, and particularly at a time where we're seeing lots of arts organisations getting back up and running and having to connect with audiences again, having to find their space and what they're working on in a new way, and we need to kind of show that this work has carried on, this work has continued. Although theatres are reopening now, theatre hasn't stopped, as I'm sure you're all aware, and you've all been part of all of the online stuff that's going on, and that's something that I wanted to kind of talk about today, and the benefits and the impact of that, because it's really important that that's getting out, that message is getting out there of how we're being the impact that the arts has in general on people. So as a bit more information, we work with our basic mask sets. You can see two of them here on this slide. Our basic set, which is very much set in emotions, as Jordana talked about, and then our intermediate set, which is also set in emotions, but it starts to be slightly more human features, less cartoony. And then our advanced set is much more like the human face, but they're all representing different characters, different emotions. And we work with these in schools, with teachers. We teach on lots of training for professional development, for practitioners, and all sorts of people. Even a lot of arts practitioners and health practitioners now are starting to work with us. We've done training with drama therapists just to see where these masks can go and what they can achieve. And we're always amazed by where and who uses these masks, because we make these sets from our arts base in St Albans, and we send them off across the world to lots of different organisations. So the stories we hear back of what's being done with them are always really fascinating, and something that we try to log and share, which is another thing we're doing as part of the 40th, which is asking people to share memories of working with our masks. So do have a look on our website after this if there's anything that you would like to share with us. So we also run the Arts Space. We run regular classes at the Arts Space, which is our School of Drama and our inclusive groups. But I will tell you a little bit more about them later, because the focus of this evening is the arts and prescription work that we've been doing over the last 5 years. And we've run 10 programmes over the last 5 years with different partners, including Mind, Dacorum Borough Council, St Albans Council, and we've really found that the use of these masks has unlocked something in terms of how people can talk about their feelings, and creating that space, as Jordana talked about, between a person and that conversation, and being able to distance yourself and use the masks as a tool, really, for having conversations about why things are making us feel certain ways. So this is our Ask Wellbeing program, which was for young people initially, and this was where we kind of started to develop this into a longer term course, and it's been really interesting to see over the years of how the cohorts have reacted. We've done 8 of these now with different young people, and we find something new every time, and we have different responses. So I wanted to share some of them with you now. You'll see here as well, there's some quotes from what's called Creative Minds. Now, this was a project that we did with with Mind in Mid Hearts over the last 2 years, And I wanted to share these quotes. So some of them are from the original courses pre-COVID, because we'd run both courses face-to-face pre-COVID, and always in the room with counsellors, with support workers, and working with our masks practically. So the quotes, such as I've improved my people skills. I like how happy it makes me feel. So I can approach people now. Putting on a mask made me feel much more confident because no one can see my face, and that's something that we're finding really interesting, that Jordana speaks a bit about as well, in terms of having that connection, but with it also being in a safe space. So we find that the masks really, really provide that for some people, in terms of them being able to feel like the performance or what's being asked of them creatively is not them. It's another character, and we can work with them to explore numerous things around that character and what they want to talk about, but it's not them. And that really kind of puts a confidence in us, in each other. It puts a safety in there, and it makes people relax, which has been really, really interesting. But of course, same as Jordana was saying, a lot of this is about connecting. So I've learned I can trust more people and that I can make friends, which is just wonderful. But we found that that's really difficult to replicate online. So the first mask wellbeing course we actually did in person, as Jordana talked about. That was the evaluation that she spoke about. That was the first one that we did during COVID. But we also piloted the second Creative Minds course. So we'd done one in person in Stevenage, but we piloted the second one online at the same time as we were running the in-person mask project for wellbeing. Now, Creative Minds was more for adults, and what we found was really fascinating in terms of how that shift to online really, really supported those adults at that time. And this was around, this started in September last year. So you can see these quotes here. I've been pretty much on my own because of my mental health condition. I've not been able to have anyone in my house. So it's been really good to have some weekly contact, to play some games and to have some fun. It's been something that's been really helpful, really good. When I was feeling bad, I wanted to get myself feeling better for this. It helped give me motivation. It's taken me out of reality and work, which is good. It's been great taking part in a mutual creative process and having fun together. Now, all of these things mention being together, which is we found really, really interesting, because moving online, we thought it was going to be really difficult to create that group space, and to be in the room, as it were, is so important for us. But actually, this was the first course that we piloted online where we started to see how beneficial it could be, just in making sure that we continue to create that creative process, and really making sure that people can have that connection. And we still managed to use the masks as well, which was really great. And they created a film where they created the characters from the masks, and we were able to talk about how those masks were feeling. And a lot of the time it was related to what was going on in their lives at the time, but it didn't have to kind of be connected. It didn't have to be them. And they just had so much fun as part of that session. And we were really pleased to see the benefits of that came out. We then from that did a mask for younger people online as well, after the success of that. And it was really interesting to see the differences. We were able to send them their masks, so they were still working with masks at home. And we've actually had young people from that program join us on our School of Drama since then, because they had the course had such an impact on them. And it's really interesting because those arts on prescription programs, we go back to what the core of arts on prescription is. It's about giving that creative experience that brings people together, enables them to cope with how they're feeling. And of course, at a time like the last year and a half, we've all been having to deal with different emotions, different ways of feeling them than how we might be normally. We're all in a collective situation that is so extraordinary to us. So actually, even our regular groups, so this is what you're seeing images of here, our regular groups that we work with, kind of became a space where the same things were needing to be were needing to be dealt with. The same conversations were being had about how hard it was and how difficult it was, particularly around mental health and well-being, and just making sure and checking in. Those sessions, the fun levels of those sessions had to kind of ramp up 150 just to really give everyone that space to let loose and have fun. So you can see pictures here of our School of Drama and our inclusive groups of when they're in person, but obviously during this last year they've all gone online. But during that time it's been absolutely amazing. We created a podcast series with our young people, and we created videos, dance videos with our inclusive groups, and we had a wonderful moment where the inclusive groups focused on emotions, and they used the mask as a tool, and they took a song, and they actually took a song to match the happy mask, because they needed to kind of remember, you know, feeling happy and think about all the things that made them happy. And they spent a term making up lyrics to "Don't Worry, Be Happy," their own lyrics from the happy mask, and then they had a dance, and it was just so wonderful to see them having those really open conversations about how they were feeling and things that were making them happy, and sharing that with each other. And that connection. So those two things together, really, of kind of being able to be open and it being a safe space and being free to kind of discuss how they're feeling, whilst also having that connection with other people, was really wonderful. Now, obviously, these groups meet regularly, whereas the Mask Wellbeing projects are shorter term projects. So they really have kind of grown up with each other over the last few years. So keeping that connection during lockdown was really important to us, and allowing them to keep seeing each other, to keep working creatively. Jordana used the phrase that, you know, creativity has been a lifeline for people during this pandemic, and I think absolutely our groups would agree with that. I mean, you can see here's some quotes from some of them. A parent from our School of Drama said to us, "You're bringing the joy weekly, and it is so very much appreciated. Thank you very much. It was certainly fun and great to see the participants so happy. She doesn't have any siblings at home, so engaging with her peers was really good for her." So you can see these things that affected everybody, and how important, you know, just a small thing like being able to have actual contact and conversations with people of your own age when you're an only child and you're at home with your parents 24/7 was something that we were really pleased to bring. And like Jordana was saying about the mask project, I think it's also really important that our young people had that opportunity outside of the school system as well, because of the way that was being run online as well. And we were unsure whether we were going to keep them because of that and being online all the time. But actually, so many of them said that session, that one session they joined a week, was something that they really, really looked forward to. And that was absolutely what everyone was needing, was fun and joy and play. And play is such a huge part of what we do as a company, that's really what we've been exploring with these social prescribing projects over the last 5 years, is how that play and our masks combined can create an environment that is beneficial for people to be part of. And just finishing here with a quote from our inclusive groups. "Without groups to access, my world becomes very small. I become isolated and sad, and I'm unable to access my local community without support. ACT UP has helped me build my confidence, maintain my speech, meet new friends, and improve my mental and physical well-being." Now, that quote was actually from pre-pandemic, but I think it really captures and tells you why we had to find ways of moving online, why it was important to do this. And that's why I kind of say, you know, I think it's really lovely to have these conversations for you to all come and listen to us talking about this evening, because at a time where a lot of the focus in the media is about theatres reopening and getting audiences in to watch shows, which of course is wonderful and absolutely a huge part of what theatre is. But there's also all of this work that's been going on during the pandemic. There's lots of shows and performances that's been going on as well online. But I think it just really does capture that last quote, the importance of why this work is so important. Use the word important a lot. So I'm just finishing up here with some lovely images for you. You will have seen this one as the promotion of this talk. Now, when we knew we were coming to the exhibition at this time, and we also knew that Lockdown Life was opening, and that Nic Madge's pandemic portrait is going to be up, we really saw the opportunity to explore this idea of a masked mask, and thinking about how much our masks come alive as characters. And Nic wonderfully came and helped us realise that as part of his project. So we wanted to share this other one with you this evening as well, of this character Victoria, who has managed to quite enjoy her lockdown here. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to Nic to tell you a bit more about that project and the impact that's had on the last year.
Thanks, Helen. We're still waiting for Victoria to give her comments about the pandemic, aren't we? Originally, she was going to do that. So it was great fun working with Helen. It's one of the examples of just what can be achieved through collaboration. And I'm sure that we'll all talk about that in a bit. I'm going to approach things slightly differently. I'm going to talk, first of all, an aspect about masks and well-being, and talk very briefly about 3 previous times in this country when people may or may not have worn masks to combat infection, combat pandemics. And then I'm going to talk a bit about my project, Pandemic Portraits. But so first of all, talking about masks in history. And the first real pandemic that hit Europe was, of course, the plague, which came in the 6th century and probably lasted initially for some 200 years before coming back at the time of the Black Death, 1348, 1349, when that plague killed 40 to 60% of the population, way, way worse than what we're going through at the moment. It led to fundamental changes in society, shortage of labor, which was the beginning of the end of the feudal system. We know about the Great Plague in London, all of us do, but what I didn't know about until I researched was the plague in St Albans. And the plague hit St Albans in 1578. And looking at the burial registers in 1578, there were 409 burials, almost all from the plague. And the stats, the proportion of that represented approximately 1/6 of the population of St Albans. So in 1578, as a result of the plague, about 1/6 of the population of St Albans died. The Great Plague in London.
Nic, I'm so sorry to bother you. Are you wanting to share your screen at the moment?
I'm going to share my screen in a minute.
I'm so sorry.
Don't worry, no. I just wanted to I wanted people to listen to what I was saying before I showed the first distracting image. Thank you, Emma. It's very kind of you, no problem. So the 1665 Great Plague, it killed approximately 1/4 of the population in London. Approximately 70% of the people who caught it died. So a far higher mortality rate than anything that we've had since. But that was different. It was caused by a bacterial infection, not by viruses. It was spread probably by fleas and mites, more often in fact than by rats. So now I'll share my screen and show the first image, which is relevant to the issue of mask wearing. So this is Dr. Schnabel von Rome, which in English means Dr. Peake from Rome. And it's a reproduction of a drawing which hangs in the Museo de Sanidad in Madrid. And it portrays a plague doctor. So the King of France's personal physician designed this anti-plague outfit for doctors in 1619. It shows a long waxed leather coat, a beak-faced mask, which had aromatic substances inside to ward off diseases, eyes protected by goggles, gloves, shoe, and a hat made from goat's fur, and the staff was used to examine patients from a distance, and if they didn't comply with the doctor's instructions, then to beat them. There's one of those in the London dungeon, but there's no evidence that that was in fact used in this country at all. I think here, rather more genteelly, we use pomanders against the plague. So these are pomanders from the Bucks County Museum and sweet smelling options, which were designed to get rid of the miasma, the bad smells, which was thought caused the plague. The second great episode of pandemic in this country was, of course, the 1918-1919 flu pandemic. It's wrong to call it the Spanish flu. It in fact originated on a chicken farm near Dodge City in Kansas. The infection almost certainly crossed over from chickens or farm animals to a guy called Albert Gitchell, a farm worker who was conscripted for the First World War, went from his farm to a army camp in Kansas with 56,000 recruits. And the flu spread very rapidly through the army camp, on troop ships, among the trenches, and then from the trenches in France to civilians in France, civilians in the States, and civilians in this country. This is an image showing people wearing masks against the 1918-1919 pandemic in California. That flu pandemic infected one third of the world's population, about 500 million people. There were over 50 million deaths, 17 million of those, in fact, in India. And the deaths from the flu pandemic were far higher than from the First World War. It's estimated that in comparison with the 50 million flu deaths, there were only perhaps 15 to 22 million military and civilian deaths as a result of the war. It became known as the Spanish flu because censorship in England, France, and the States meant that there could be no reference to it in the media. It became reported in the Spanish newspapers where there was no censorship, and that's why it became known wrongly as the Spanish flu. This is a newspaper article from the Times in January 1919, when it was questioned what could be done about mask wearing. Mask wearing was never compulsory in this country, but the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in this article said that he doubted whether masks could be used as a general measure, but prima facie it would be a good thing. Masks were compulsory in some states in the United States. So in California, they were compulsory. There were fines of between $5 and $100 or 10 days in jail. But this is a San Francisco newspaper report about someone who was in fact shot by a deputy public health officer for not wearing his flu mask in San Francisco. He was taken to hospital, seriously injured. The police did make an arrest. The police did not arrest the guy who shot him. They in fact arrested the injured man for not wearing his mask. And here we have an image of police officers in the States wearing masks. The third pandemic which resulted in mask wearing is the Sars epidemic of 2000-2004. This is an image in Hong Kong, and this is an image of people wearing masks in Taiwan. Only 8,000 people were infected, and the total worldwide death from SARS in 2002 to 2004 was 774 people. So again, that epidemic was less serious than ours now. So in my remaining couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about pandemic portraits. So last autumn, I realized that we were living through history. I wondered how we were documenting it. It was clearly the worst challenge that we faced in St Albans over the last 70 years. And so I talked with people at the museum and started to go out photographing people in St Albans with a cheap black backdrop that I bought on the internet. And I set myself up often outside the town hall, old town hall, but also in other places, approaching people, asking if I can take photographs and asking everyone to make a few comments. So what I've learned from that is that the pandemic has had very different effects upon different people. We're all different. We know that over 150,000 people have died in the United Kingdom from COVID. In St Albans, the total is 357. What's got less publicity is long COVID, previously healthy people who have real long-term difficulties, which can last for months and months, sometimes as long as a year. We don't think enough about the effect that the pandemic had on young people. The lives of young people really have been disrupted. Schooling, university has been wrecked. We don't think enough about the effect on people with disabilities. Two of the most uplifting days that I've had have been taking photographs with groups, Passport for Leisure, Daylight Club, people with disabilities, and learning about the particular effect that the pandemic has had upon them. We don't think enough about the effect that the pandemic has had upon homeless people. I photographed with people involved with the charity Open Door. And turning to the positive things, the key positive message that I've got from all of this is the sense of community and the impact that vaccination has been having. The impact of people volunteering with the vaccination centres has been very profound indeed. People have found new interests, people have exercised more, people have baked, people have painted, and have taken advantage of the peace and solitude. That's been contrasted with difficulties that people have had with homeschooling, and there's been real contrast between people experiencing peace and solitude outside the home and sometimes difficulties within the home. Businesses have been very much affected, obviously, but even business owners have taken advantage, have enjoyed peace, quiet, and, as Keith has said, loving a less hectic life. Some people have positively enjoyed the pandemic, and this photograph of David said at the end of my conversation with him that he would like to do it all over again. And finally, the image of Marie-Françoise, who very much sums up the sense of community, the added sense of solidaire which she's experienced. But like many people, she's missed face-to-face contact. She's missed contact with more distant relatives. So that, very briefly, is what I wanted to say about the project. And I'll hand back to Emma.
Thank you so much, Nic. That was fascinating. And sorry again for interrupting you at the beginning. So what we're going to do now, after hearing from Nic and Jordana and Helen, is we've got a few questions that I'm going to be asking them as a panel. But while we're doing that, please do, if you have any questions from the audience, please do put them in the Q&A box, and we'd love to answer those questions as well, if anything has come to mind that you'd like to ask everyone. So I'm going to start by thinking about how the pandemic has brought our relationship with masks to the fore. And Nic, I know you've just been speaking about this a little bit. Through your project, you've met a lot of different people in and around St Albans. How do people feel about wearing masks in St Albans? How has this changed throughout the year?
I've photographed almost 500 people, and the mask deniers, the COVID deniers, are an incredibly small minority. Out of 500 people, probably 2 or 3 people have said, I don't believe that masks help. I refuse to wear a mask, or I do so under compulsion. Obviously, there are people with medical exemptions, that's different. But I find it very reassuring that the vast majority of people that I've met take the pandemic very seriously. And although no one is really happy about wearing masks, the vast majority of people wear them. It's not changed a huge amount. It's obviously people wear them inside, going in shops, etc. Outside, there was a period when we had the surge back in December, when the rate per 100,000 went up to 700 per 100,000 in St Albans, when there certainly were more people in the street wearing masks. But it wasn't as significantly different as one might expect, perhaps because generally people recognize that the risk, I'm not a doctor, but the risk of contracting COVID if you're socially distanced in the open air is not very great. One of the changes that I did see was that at the very beginning, a few people were seeing masks as a kind of fashion accessory. There were designer masks, there were masks which matched outfits, which I thought was very impressive. There are still people with very creative masks. I saw a woman with a lovely mask of a photograph of herself while she was being vaccinated. Which was very creative. Some people,
Wow.
indeed, some of your colleagues, Emma, have made their own masks from their own artwork, which I think is very impressive. But I think that we've actually become ground down, and masks have become more functional, less exciting, less interesting. That they are something which we wear primarily to provide safety for other people. I think they're far more important, preventing us giving COVID to other people rather than from protecting ourselves. But people may well have different views about that.
That's fascinating. Interesting to hear that change that maybe has been happening. Helen, I was interested about thinking about masks throughout the time that Trestle has been working. Can you tell me about the changing masks within Trestle throughout its history?
I can. And just to go a little bit off of what Nic just said as well, it's really interesting. As part of our exhibition at the moment, we captured some oral histories from people that have worked with the company, people who've been part of the company, people who've participated in projects, etc., but also current staff. And one of the things that our mask department manager said was that he's found this year so interesting because the word masks has become a household word, whereas before, we kind of talked about being a mask and physical theatre company, and the connection between mask and theatre and theatrical masks was very clear. And I think there's something quite interesting. We had a really fun thing at the beginning of the pandemic where we had to change all of our Google analytics because we looked like we were trying to get to make money off the back of the pandemic by having masks in our SEOs, but we were like, it's theatrical masks, it's different. So it's quite fascinating, being a company that to us that's our everyday, and how that's affected people's opinions. I think in a way it's quite interesting because something that we do a lot of is working with actors and people who are young people who are not trained actors, so their understanding of mask now and being used to kind of having their mouth covered and part of their face and their nose, they are used to that a bit more now. So that's been quite interesting as we're starting to go back into schools and working with more young people now, that it used to always be something that we had to address quite quickly, whereas now they're just it's a completely different thing in terms of their understanding, which is great, and then excited by a mask that isn't a COVID mask, something new, something different. But for us as a company, the masks have changed and transformed a lot, and they're always different to our the masks that we might make for a show as well. So we started off kind of working with helmet masks, really, which are like the full head masks, all of which you can kind of see examples of in the exhibition at the minute. But the early workshop mask, which are the ones that kind of you saw the characters wearing earlier in the images and that you see quite regularly on our marketing, they are what we'd call kind of full face theatrical masks. So they were developed right back in '94, and you can see the first set in the exhibition, and then you can see kind of how that's developed to be the set that we have now. And it did change quite a lot, but that was mostly the processes that changed. So originally they were made out of a thing called Celastic, and they're now made out of a HIPS plastic, which is the same stuff that the Stormtrooper costumes are made of, interestingly. It was part of our Trestle trivia last week, but that's been so that's kind of a major shift, that we started off kind of papier-mâché, then we moved to Celastic, and now we back form our masks using heat and pressure and out of plastic. So we've changed, our processes have changed. We as a company, we've obviously grown and had more ability to be able to do that bigger scale work. But when we go back to making a mask for a show, it all starts with the same process, which is hand molding clay to create something that is representative of a character. And that's the core that's really exciting and interesting. You know, that hasn't changed. It's always starting about going, who is this person? Who is this character? Who is this mask? What character are we making here? So I think that's kind of the core really of what our masks mean to us.
You've made me think about, I wonder if you'll ever develop a mask that is a character of someone wearing a mask, of a blank bottom face.
We had a few in a few shows this year. So, you know, I was actually teaching in a few drama schools during the pandemic, and at the point where we were able to go back into person, we did a whole show about COVID, using our intermediate masks. So we had people lined up for the supermarket in masked characters, how they were reacting, you know, the person that had it not on their nose, and the person that didn't want to, that wanted to stay away from everyone and had it all on perfectly. It was really, it was really fun to play with. Cathartic as well.
I found it fascinating collaborating with Helen and her colleagues wearing their Trestle masks and then them putting on their COVID masks, and then me approaching them in exactly the same way that I approach people in the street, asking them to write down their comments and their thoughts about COVID and how it had affected them. And they did that in character. It was absolutely fascinating. Brilliant, Helen.
That's wonderful. That's great. So kind of on a similar topic, I know that we know, of course, that creativity has played a really important role with how people have dealt with lockdowns, and Jordana spoke about that a lot at the beginning. And I know that you've between the three of you, worked with a lot of different kinds of groups in St Albans and in the surrounding areas. Do you reflect a bit on how the different groups with different needs, how their need for creative outlet, what their different requirements of creative outlet have been based on these different groups?
Yeah, I think what Helen said about the online versus the face-to-face, and yeah, the fact that, you know, the online, you'd think, oh, it's, you know, it's definitely inferior, and there'd be this sense that as soon as we come out of the pandemic, everyone want to go back face to face. I don't think that's the case. And actually one of the recommendations to come from the evaluation is that going forward, that perhaps we take consider taking a more blended approach, because people do really value that face-to-face interaction, being in the same room with people when creating it. It has a special element, but also the online for certain groups. So one of the groups that sort of really informed the evaluation, they had severe lived experience of loneliness. And I think one person described Zoom as a step away from loneliness, and that, you know, at certain points in their life, at certain points in the pandemic, they wouldn't have felt comfortable to go face to face, even if it was something that was offered. They felt that, you know, it's quite a safe place for them to engage, to still have, you know, that interaction, but, you know, to do it from their own home. And yeah, so I think then there really needs to be that consideration going forward, and, you know, to see, you know, the silver lining really, that the fact that, you know, all these activities were able to transition online, and what that's shown us about the way that we can use that as well, I think is really important.
I think it's quite interesting, and something I didn't put on my slide with the Creative Minds programme was that another thing they said about joining online was that even when they were feeling low and struggling and having a difficult week, joining online was much more accessible than actually having to get out the house and go to a space and get on the bus and go, you know, it was really, really interesting to see how many of them actually referenced that in the feedback at the end of that project, where they kind of said, you know, actually, obviously, of course, we want to try and get out, but it was quite nice sometimes having that, being able to still attend, whereas before I wouldn't have gone because I couldn't have gone that day. And I think that was something, you know, that's something that we also need to take on board from this in terms of access and what this has done for everyone, and access, you know, for parents with childcare, for people with disabilities who need, you know, who find it difficult to go to certain spaces as well. I think there's lots of learning to be done there.
Yeah, something really important for us to think about as we move out of this, hopefully out of this stage, and think about what the role is going to be of online spaces in the future.
Can I approach this in two different ways? First of all, the for vulnerable people, the worst aspect, apart from physical health issues, is the effect of isolation on mental health. And that is far worse for vulnerable people than for affluent people with nice houses and gardens. And part of what I've been doing is not just been photographing in the street, but photographing with groups. So I think I mentioned Passport for Leisure and the Daylight Club and young adults with disabilities, Open Door homelessness charity. And I found that really uplifting. And I think it's been positive for the people who've been taking part in the project, the people that I've been photographing, the people that I've been listening to, the people who've been expressing themselves. And it's affirming, it's recognizing and people realizing that what everyone feels as a result of the pandemic is important, is valid. It's a sharing, it's a reduction of isolation. That's one thing. And I think it's not important not to be too precious about art. Creativity can take many forms in relation to that. And I've already talked about how baking, gardening, walking, all kinds of things are helpful in that way. The second thing that I wanted to say is that the particular collaboration that I've had, and we all know that there is amazing creativity going on. This may be totally anecdotal, but totally wasn't actually said, but someone once said that Bianca Jagger said that she could always tell what kind of relationship Mick Jagger was in. If the music was great, he was in a crap relationship. If the music was crap, he was in a great relationship. And the reason I say that is that the problems, the angst, the pain that COVID is producing, I think is one of the factors, combined with additional time that we all have in some phenomenally creative art. And the most direct contact that I've had has been my collaboration with musicians. And each of my monthly editions of Pandemic Portraits has a soundtrack. And many of them have actually been specially composed by local musicians who have looked at the comments that the sitters in the portraits have made, what they've written, what their emotions are. And they've incorporated the emotions of the pandemic, the emotions of lockdown into their music. And that, I think, is phenomenal. It's so, so positive. And the combination of the images, the words of the people who've sat for the portraits and the musicians, the sum of the three is greater than the three individual parts.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about your photos are the captions that go alongside them. It adds a new level. And I think, like you were saying, you know, it with isolation and loneliness, just having someone asking you how you're feeling and what you think, the impact of that is hard to measure, and especially listening to it and writing it down and recording it as something that other people are going to read and understand about you. I think it's fascinating.
Can I just give one
Yeah,
moment example? Yesterday, I met a deaf man. I had not thought about what being deaf in a pandemic would be like. I walked up to him and he couldn't work out what I was saying because my mouth was covered by a mask. I had to remove my mask so that he could lip read. And when I asked for details, obviously he can only have phone calls by text. He can't speak or listen on the phone. Just think, you know, we all grumble sometimes about the effect of the pandemic. Just think of the effect if you can't hear.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Just my last question before we move on to some of the, we're getting towards the end of our time, but just thinking about St Albans specifically, has this year changed the way that people in St Albans relate to the arts? Has it made it more democratic, perhaps, more people getting involved? We've seen in the Lockdown Life exhibition at the museum, all these different community groups coming in and making art. Has that been your experience as well in your professional capacities of democratization of art in St Albans?
I think one of the very positive things that we can, try and take from all of this is all of the discussion about art and people having time to make art and get involved in these things that we've talked about. You know, I've just seen Chris Blanche in the chat has mentioned Salpy and Daylight Club and Passport to Leisure, as Nick said. You know, all of these groups who are meeting and doing wonderful things, but also the creative elements. You know, Gray's Isolation Cafe is part of the Lockdown Life exhibition that came out of, you know, wanting to share this experience creatively, and there's some absolutely wonderful responses in that exhibition. I had a walk around it last week. I was privy to it as I was putting up our installation, but it's, you know, I think just that in itself, my answer to that question would be go and see that exhibition, because it's all there and more. There's more. If that's just a fraction of what we've been able to get together to collect to show people, you know, think of all of the stuff that people are doing in their own homes, like Nick was saying, that they're not particularly considering creativity, but is hugely creative.
Yeah, I would very much recommend people to go visit, and more art, people's art is being added every day. We're having more rocks added to the collection of rock, more pictures being pinned up on the windows. We're putting more stuff on the website and through our social media. So we're adding to this collection of community-made art museum.
Emma, I completely agree with what both you and Helen have said. There has been phenomenal creativity. Yes, we think of lockdown as being restrictive, but in fact, it's also had a liberating effect. We think that the closure of the traditional venues, whether that's traditional theatres, traditional music venues, traditional museums, traditional galleries, has had a negative effect. And of course, it's had a negative effect, of course. But people have been creative. There have been online concerts. There have been small-scale concerts in Verland Park. There is, as Helen has said, Gray's wonderful Isolation Arts Cafe. Poetry has been written. Yesterday, I spoke to a sculptor who had been writing poetry because of lockdown. There are textile artists that I know who've been creating wonderful things. And the fact that we've been freed from traditional venues, I think, has been a democratization. It's meant that it's been far easier for people. And from my perspective, initially I thought of Pandemic Portraits as being a historical record. Far more, I think of it as a way in which, I hate the phrase ordinary people, there is no such thing as an ordinary person, but people who do not consider themselves to be special, ordinary people, you know, everyone that we meet has something to say. And if Pandemic Portraits achieves anything, I hope that it's giving a forum for people, everyone, to express how they feel about COVID, the bad things, the good things, the hopes and their fears. And I think that really is a democratization.
Well, that's a great point to bring us to some of our questions. We had some lovely comments, as Helen mentioned, from Chris Blanche, so thank you so much for that. And we've got a question actually for Nick, which is very relevant to what you were just speaking about. Your photography project capturing this particular moment in time will form a really useful social history record for the future. When the pandemic is over, do you have any plans to document any other aspects of life in 21st century St Albans? Or do you think it was the nature of the pandemic that lent itself so specifically and so well to this type of graphic documentation?
The simple answer to that is I have no idea at all. Pandemic Portraits is totally engrossing at the moment. It's wonderful. I'm very, very privileged to be doing it. I'm very, very privileged to be listening to so many other people. I found when I finished my MA, I did an MA which finished December 19. I found for 6 months after doing my MA in documentary photography and photojournalism that I could not pick up my camera. I could not answer the question, Nick, why should you take photographs? And then Pandemic Portraits arrived, it came. Yes, I hope that I will have photographic projects in the future. I hope that they will be people related. I'm a people person. I enjoy photographing. I enjoy meeting people. I hope that there'll be future projects. I don't have a clue what they'll be.
That's great. And I think you can really see that people trusted you with how they felt in the captions that you've you've captured in this exhibition. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what else you get to capture in the future. Well, I think we're already past our time, so I'm going to wrap this up, but it really has been an absolute pleasure like speaking to all of you and hearing all of your experiences. I think it's given everyone a bit of pause for thought of what this year has meant to all of us. So thank you so much to Nic, to Helen, to Jordana. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you everyone who's come to listen. I hope you found this interesting, and thank you for your questions and comments. Oh, did you want to?
And I'm just going to say one thing, Emma, which you have been far too modest to say, which is the museum is doing a fantastic job. Go and see Helen's Trestle exhibition at the museum. It's fascinating. Go and see Lockdown Life, the exhibition contributed by community groups in St Albans. Preet's Rainbow Trail, which we haven't talked about, which is fantastic. St Albans Rocks, which we did talk about briefly. The other community groups have all contributed wonderful things. Go and see them.
Well, I need to say well done to my team, because I can claim no part in it, but particularly Sarah, our curator, who's been working so closely with a lot of different community groups, and I know has worked with both Nic and Helen very closely. And yeah, she's done an incredible job. So I was actually going to recommend to everyone to come see the exhibitions now. I'm going to share my screen to let everyone know a little bit about what's going on. So as mentioned, we've actually got 4 exhibitions on at the moment, so it's a packed schedule at the museum. We've got continuing that unfortunately had to close for a while during the pandemic. We've got our Cabaret Mechanical Marvels, which is another beautifully creative exhibition where you get to press buttons and see things move in these lovely kind of moving sculptures. Lockdown Life, as we've mentioned, that brings together all these community groups. Helen's Trestle Behind the Mask exhibition, that is to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Trestle, and Pandemic Portraits, Nic's exhibition as well. So do come and see those. We're open every day, so please do come and visit. And if you're not able to join us in person, we do have another online talk in the running. It's coming on Monday. It's as part of Sustfest. We're speaking with Kate Bretherton, who's another local person who's done a lot of research into the trees of St Albans and is having an exhibition with us later this year that is giving us a little preview about her thoughts of how she's putting this exhibition together as part of Sustfest on Monday night. And as part of the Trestle exhibition in half term, we're having a performance from some of the young people that Trestle work with out in front of the museum on the street with their masks, and it's going to be really good fun, free to come along to, so please do come and see that in half term. It's really been an absolute pleasure, and I'm going to finish us off and say good night to everyone. So thank you so much for coming, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.